As I said back in my Castlevania 1 video, I did not grow up with too much Castlevania. I didn't get deep into the series until a little later, with only 2 that I played before I went to college. However, long before I played any Castlevania game, I read opinions about them by dudes a good few years older than me on GameFAQs, Game Trailers, and Screw Attack about the series. What they loved, what they didn't love, and what they believed to constitute a true Castlevania. When it came to classic Castlevania on those forums, if you didn't call Castlevania 4 or Castlevania 3 the best one, then you had a fringe opinion. Castlevania 4 had the 16 bits, Mode 7, 8-way whipping, and longer stages, while Basedvania 3 had multiple playable characters, diverging paths, NES toughness, and a bunch of shit I'll talk about today. Keep in mind as I say that, Bloodlines had no re-release at the time, and few people in English knew about Rondo of Blood beyond the Super NES version. Not to mention, people generally looked at Castlevania 1 through 4 as the main Castlevania games. Even if a little research tells us that Castlevania 4 faked the sequel spot, the narrative that these 4 made up the main series stuck with English speakers for a long time, especially during this period when NES and Super NES games had gotten easy to emulate. Forum goers pointed newbies to these 4 as a primer for the series, or even said just play 1, 3, and 4 before thinking of anything else. Because of that, when mommy eventually gave me a little money, I decided to make a hot Texas walk to Walgreens to obtain myself a pure silver Wii Points card to buy Castlevania 3 and 1,500 Wii Points worth of something not Castlevania related. They recently added C3 to the Virtual Console on Wii, so I thought I should start there. Everyone said Castlevania 2 sucked hard, and at the time I fully believed that bigger adventure mean better adventure, so I wanted the biggest 8-bit adventure. That way I could start with an 8-bit game before trying the others. Meaning that yes, I started playing the Castlevania series with the North American version of the NES's finale. After beating it, I enjoyed it quite a bit, yet felt very done with it. It took me weeks to play every route. While I played Firstlevania 3 expecting it to prime me for the rest of the series, I decided to stop there and not play other Castlevania games for a while. Longlevania 3 drained me like a hooker. I enjoyed my hard time and happily paid up, but I had no desire to continue after I finished round 3. Again, like the last 2, very little to say about Vania 3's development. Same guys as the first 2 made it, probably a couple extra dudes on staff, team got broken up after Castle 3 released. Truly, can't believe that a big gaming company could ever break up a team that made a high quality product. Pure speculation here, I get the feeling that Konami mostly left the fired Vania 3 team alone during development. A few months before the Japanese release in late '89, TMNT had the first NES and arcade releases. As I said in the first video, Konami started to see TMNT as their big moneymaker. Each Turtles entry played fairly well by licensed game standards and had mass appeal in a shit ton of countries. Just look at the list of dubs. Croatia actually let these turtles cross the waters to Bosnia. Additionally, Konami already knew about the upcoming Super Famicom and had another team start the version of Akumajo Dracula we know as Castlevania 4 by the time Ladlevania 3 reached the last portion of development. Again, speculation, I get the feeling from this that Konami already knew that they wanted to break up the original Castlevania team before 3 even released. Konami still supported the NES pretty heavily up through 1992, but I guess they figured that once Castlevania moved to 16 bits, it couldn't go back. Though it's still especially strange that Konami broke up that team when we can see that Konami confidently knew that, unlike some of their other series, Castlevania had somewhat equal popularity in Japan and North America. I mean, I guess a little more popular in Japan once you factor in populations. Japan has 1/3 of the population of just the USA. Either way, not much more to delay actually talking about the game. If Castlevania 2 suffered from over-ambition with all the proto-Metroidvania elements, then I guess you could say Castlevania 3, Dracula's Amount He Can Chew, had ambition with knowledge of the drawbacks caused by the system, medium, and game design possibilities of the era. Akamatsu's team pushed the series and 2D action games forward just the right amount. Perhaps with the release of the PC Engine CD-ROM system, and the Sega Genesis between Castlevania 2 and 3's release, in addition to the internal knowledge that Nintendo had the Super Famicom coming soon, the team felt more comfortable with not pushing the envelope too far, instead perfecting what already existed with a few small touches of improvement. Most notably, the story. Unlike 1 and 2, Sequel 3 actually has an intro text scroll for players to read. It features a basic summary of the story and enough setup for someone without the manual to fully understand what they're doing. However, for funsies, I'm gonna read through the whopping 4 small page story section in the Japanese manual. One of the longest I have seen in a Famicom game, though I can't find the Japanese manual for most of the big late Famicom RPGs like Dragon Quest IV. Also, I have taken this from a very old VG museum page, so I could have a few mistranslated words. In 15th century Europe, during the Dark Ages, there was a man who was feared by all, a man who rejected his humanity, a man named Count Vlad Tepes, otherwise known as Dracula. At his territory in Wallachia, he used his power to summon an evil deity. Said deity granted him evil power, and in exchange, he summoned several evil apparitions from the evil spirit world in order to scorch and massacre the entire nation of Wallachia with darkness. Afterwards, he felt confident enough to scheme a plot to take over all of Europe. The East Orthodox Church grew desperate to solve this situation, so they immediately dispatched the most powerful army they could muster to Wallachia, who never returned. As a last resort, the Pope made a request to those he believed could stop Dracula. A man from the underworld, a man who uses forbidden arts, and a pair of vampire hunters to end Wallachia's oppression. First, Sypha Belnades of the East Orthodox Church, an apprentice monk who aims to become a priest. Sypha has powerful magic abilities that harness power from the atmosphere to let them manipulate fire, ice, and lightning bolts. Sypha lost his parents when he was young and was found wandering near the monastery, where he remained at the once beautiful Wallachia. Sypha knew that the place in his memories was now tainted, and he accepted the Pope's request to liberate Wallachia. At the same time, within Wallachia, a group of rebels covertly plotted to overthrow Count Dracula. However, their human strength stood no chance against Dracula's dark powers. He tore some men to pieces, skewered others, and transformed some into hideous monsters, including a carefree man named Grant Dynasty. Those who tainted their hand once don't know when to stop. Count Dracula did not feel satisfied with the power he already had after selling his soul and body to the spirits. He wanted more. Thus, Dracula applied the contract to his own son. Dracula's son, who still had a human heart even after getting rid of his soul, opposed his father. Dracula's son no longer had a human body, and just looking at it reminded him of his hatred for his father. However, he cannot challenge his own father. As he has a lesser version of Dracula's power, he has a low chance of winning without help against him. Although his relationship to Dracula is a burden for the cross, Adrian Fahrenheit Tepes opted to fight anyway. He changed his name to Alucard and infiltrated Wallachia underground with the purpose of destroying his father and restoring beauty to his country. In an effort to strengthen his chances, he began searching for a comrade that shared his same ideal. After some time passed, the Pope reached a predicament once again. Sypha, the vampire hunter who the Pope sent out to Wallachia, did not return after the promised period. The Pope assumed that since Sypha didn't return, he failed his mission and likely died by Dracula's power. At this point, a genuine vampire hunter from the Belmont family appeared to fulfill the Pope's request. The Belmont family, with their tenacious willpower and seemingly bottomless strength, were treated no differently from the actual vampires. Townsfolk Europe over feared the Belmonts. Because of this, the Belmont family lived far away from common people, becoming almost folkloric. The Pope searched in all directions until he finally met a man from the Belmont bloodline, a long-haired young man named Ralph C. Belmont. Go back in time more than 100 years before Simon Belmont's time, when the battle between Dracula and mankind began. Stressing again, I read that off of a very old site and changed a few words around because it had clear typos and maybe some literal translations. I left a few oddities that I can talk about later. Either way, significantly longer than either of the past two games. It mentioned all four of our playable characters, Alucard, Grant, Sypha, and Ralph, Dracula, the time period, and even a pope that we never see in-game. Altogether, this blurb sets up the dark powers of Dracula better than Castlevania 1, where he coasted off of iconography, or Simon's Quest, where he came off as a salty mega hater to me. For the version inside of the game itself, we get a shortened version of the text which removes mention of other player characters and the Pope, instead focusing on Dracula and Ralph. Okay, let's start with Mr. Nader here. As any good American citizen knows, Castlevania 3 stars Trevor C. Belmont as he goes on a grand quest against an army. In the Japanese Akumajo Densetsu, or Akuma Castle Legends, Trevor had the name Ralph C. Belmont. Their reasoning for changing it in America? I don't know actually. I haven't seen any official explanations. Now, as an English speaker, sorry to anyone named Ralph Ralph has a funnier noise than Trevor, which gives off some more Chad vibes, like Steve Trevor or Trevor Spacey. Ralph, I'll think of Wreck-It Ralph or Ralph Wiggum. I feel like English speakers in the modern age mainly just go vibes when they name their kids, and in that sense, Trevor has some more vampire hunter energy. But from the East Asian perspective, where they put more emphasis on a name's meaning when naming children, I get why they went with Ralph. Trevor, in its original Welsh, just means someone who comes from a large settlement, while Ralph means a wolf council, which sounds fucking badass meaning-wise. We can see that in his design too, mainly in later games. Similar to Simon before they settled on just using either of the two Chronicles designs, usually the Barbarian one, artists drew Trevor a few different ways. And yeah, I'm just gonna call him Trevor from now on. Fuck off and eat your hamburgers. For the actual sprite, the artist just slightly altered Simon's to have longer hair, a headband, and a clothier looking torso. In my opinion at least, it's hard to tell with these sprites sometimes. Despite the cloth, most of the Eastern and Western art drew Trevor with armor more consistently than Simon. I only found one piece of artwork on the Castlevania wiki from this Japanese strategy guide which dresses him in more cloth. His later design, introduced in Curse of Darkness, which they use for most spin-offs and loosely adapted for the Netflix show, gives off the wolf vibes more to me. He has claw marks on his face, pointy shoes, and only a little bit of metal from his chains, giving him a little sheen like that of a wolf's teeth or claws. His Judgment design takes it further with added furs, and you know what, y'all have eyes. If I make a Judgment video, we're gonna spend a while on these. I think this wild wolf aesthetic matches to make Trevor stand out from Simon and match the era he comes from. Simon came of age in an era where the people respected the Belmonts and knew from birth that he had a responsibility to kill Dracula. He received the training and equipment necessary to stop him, giving him his confidence and a burden to not let down his ancestors. While Trevor, living in a time when the people hated the Belmonts, only had himself after his parents passed. He scavenged the wilderness like a wolf. Before we move off of Trevor, one more thing to talk about. That C in his name. In the Japanese, English, and Anniversary collection, it all says that Dracula's curse takes place 100 years before Simon's fight with Dracula. But as we know from the Japanese Castlevania 1 manual, a Belmont named Christopher stopped Dracula 100 years before Simon. So what gives? Well, we have a potential answer to this. In a 2chan Q&A from someone who more likely than not was Yasuo Okuda, the writer for Castlevania 3 8-bit Story Limitations Curse, he stated that he always intended for the C in Trevor's name to stand for Christopher. Trevor's legend slightly altered over time. Only issue, Konami had another game released between Castlevania 2 and 3, Castlevania The Adventure for Game Boy, also called Dracula Densetsu, Dracula Legends in Japan. Both teams wanted to tell the story of the Belmont that fought Dracula directly before Simon, and for a long time, these existed as extremely dissonant versions of Dracula's first bout with the Bountmonts. After all, early Castlevania didn't worry about continuity. It wanted the B-movie vibe where everyone acted in these films. So with that perspective, it didn't matter much. Though once Koji Igarashi took over the series and focused more on continuity, he just made a flat-out retcon where Trevor's story takes place 200 years before Simon's, and Christopher's takes place between them. Technically fitting with how Castlevania 1 said that Christopher defeated the first resurrected Dracula, as you need to die once to go through a resurrection. It also means that both stories have more respect put on them. Now, I don't respect that first Game Boy game much, but that's for another day. Time to get to the real shit. If Castlevania 3 has one thing going for it, it's the routing options. You have many different ways to play it, but if you want to just beat every level once, then you can do it in 3 routes. Due to this, I played the game 4 times. Thrice in the Japanese Akumajo Densetsu, where I used every partner and beat every stage, and only one more run in the North American Castlevania 3. Many of y'all know why already, but I plan for my choice to make sense as we reach the end. In terms of gameplay, Castlevania 3 goes back to Castlevania 1 structure. Go from point A to point B, where you normally fight a boss, then progress to the next stage. You have your main weapon, one sub-weapon at a time, and pausing brings up nothing. You just have whatever you see on screen. Trevor has no discernible difference from Simon's Castlevania 1 incarnation, so we don't need to harp on that too long. I've seen a lot of people state that they did this due to backlash towards Simon's quest, but that really doesn't line up with the opinions of the late 80s. Japanese audiences audience's biggest gripe with Simon's Quest related to the load screens, not the general game structure, so more likely than not the team just felt like they had a good break with Simon's Quest and wanted to go back to the first game structure, which, by doing as such, they could go crazy with the level variety. Castlevania 3 did take one big thing from Dracula 2, and that's levels outside of the castle. Of the kinda 18-ish stages in Dracula's Curse, only 6 take place in Castlevania. By the way, even the Japanese map says Castlevania over here. I think that marks the first time in the Japanese release. You travel outside of the castle way more than inside of it, making this feel like a trip across Wallachia. A true epic adventure through the swamps, clock tower, ghost ship, and more. The ghost ship becoming a long-standing Castlevania level trope, coming back in at least Rondo of Blood and Legacy of Darkness off the top of my head. Plus, since Castlevania 3 already had a very solid backbone, the team has made the game look way prettier. Now, not exactly with the main character and enemy sprites. All of those keep the same early NES quality from Castlevania 1, despite games with higher graphical fidelity releasing like Blaster Master, Mario 2, and Willow. Instead, they go all out with the backgrounds. Even as early as level 1, we see the church room, which prepares you for the many vertical segments of the game, with an insane stained glass background. So much red, blue, black, orange, white, pink, hot damn, this has so many colors for an NES game. They clearly learned a lot while making Castlevania 2, only now they fit the gothic horror far better. Take the woods for example. In Castlevania 2, it looks fine. You can tell where the tree trunks stop and the leaves start, so it has more than lots of NES games, but it has some, Hanna-Barbera going on. Every tree and leaf has the exact same proportions. Then take a look at Castlevania 3 and holy shit! Trees with different sizes, various types of foliage pointed in every direction, and moodier lighting than even the knight had in Simon's Quest. Trevor travels through a real forest. Simply amazing to see. Then the clock tower. So the clock tower existed ever since Castlevania 1 and all its variants, but in those games it didn't have much going on and you hung out there very briefly in one, with this super, piss color on the cogs that don't move or interact with the player in a meaningful way. Castlevania 3 implements all the iconic pieces of the clock tower, a focus on verticality, moving cogs to jump on, a swinging pendulum, and instead of the most annoying fucking fleamen to ever grace the earth,
fuck this, I'm damage sponging it,
we have Medusa heads that give you just the right amount of time to figure out their direction. At the top of the tower, we fight a puke-colored cone-head looking motherfucker that climbs walls and throws axes from the ceiling. Once defeated, he transforms into our first possible party member, Grant Dynasty. As we learned in the Japanese manual, Dracula turned Grant into a hideous monster and killed the rest of his pirate crew, filling Grant with a stronger desire to stop Dracula, leading him to offer Trevor his assistance. Then for some translation confusion, back in the manual, it said both that the Pope asked for the assistance of 4 different heroes, implying all of our playable ones, but also later states how a group of rebels chose to fight back themselves. So even within that one text blurb, I don't entirely know if the Pope knew Grant. Same goes for Alucard, because he had his own reasons to fight Dracula as well. On top of that, in the English game, Grant mentions how Dracula killed his family, a family not mentioned in any other English or Japanese writing as much as I can tell. I don't know, it's hard to tell. Out of all the characters in C3, Grant has received the least appearances in other Castlevania projects. Mainly just Judgment, meaning that Grant never got his kinks ironed out like the other characters down the road, which I find really sad because Grant is the fucking GOAT. So Grant easily has the least going on story-wise, which, fair. He's just a dude with no supernatural powers or cursed bloodline, but in the Japanese version, I easily call him the best. Grant's main appeal involves his mobility. He can jump high, change direction midair, and climb on surfaces. Grant lets you take shortcuts and find goodies that Trevor has a hard time getting. Not only that, he has good attacks too. By default, he uses the throwing knife just by pressing B, meaning that Grant has a full-screen projectile without using hearts. Well, for sub-weapons, he can only get the axe and stopwatch, options that I feel complement Trevor really well. Back in the Castlevania 1 video, I mentioned how Akamatsu purposefully made the cross and holy water the best options, meaning that when available, a skilled player always skips the knife and, in most situations, the axe. Grant only really using these two means that you can always have both weapons on standby once you get it for him. Pair that with a cross or holy water on Trevor, and you can basically have all but one sub-weapon on you at all times. Which reminds me, I never talked about this in the Castlevania 1 video, the double and triple shots. In the 3 good versions of Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 3, we have a stone tower tablet you can find called the Double Shot. You find this by destroying enough candles or enemies with your subweapon. When found, it makes it so you can have 2 or 3 of a given subweapon on screen at once, rather than dealing with the cooldown time. So, when you have a double shot on Grant's axe and a triple shot on Trevor's holy water or cross, nothing can stop you. You have the answer for absolutely everything. No cheap shot enemies, no bosses that can hurt you. You can breeze through any combat like this. Say a woman can feel 10% of a Castlevania fan's pain of losing a triple shot cross during childbirth. Not long after getting Grant, you come up on your second fork in the road. By the way, the first was to go to the clock tower and get Grant. You only missed 2 extra screens by going to get him. At this second fork, you have the main choice of if you want to take the hard path or the easy path. No obvious indicator that one is easier than the other, but I don't think a single player argues over which one poses a greater threat. Now, since I plan to play with Grant again in my North American playthrough, I took the bottom path for my Japanese run with him. Going down the bottom starts you in this swamp stage that I've always kind of associated with Grant. Maybe because of the frogs jumping the same way as him and his greenish skin. As Trevor, you can easily fall into the bog, so Grant helps a lot here. It also thematically fits with the whole lower path as the underground of Dracula's castle. Ignoring that stupid fucking Amiga version, I've always had a soft spot for the first part of Block 4 in Castlevania 1. Within the short trek, you saw one of the most different biomes in Castlevania 1. Castlevania 3 makes a third of the game out of that underground idea, and oh no. At the end of level 2 of the lower path, you find a coffin housing a vampire ready to fight you. Said vampire, Alucard, son of Dracula. On paper, one of the rawest ideas for a secondary character. Dracula's son, pissed off at his father's behavior and decision to turn both of them into creatures of the night. Debatably, more motivation to fight Dracula than Trevor. Hence why he had more main character energy for season 2 of the Netflix show. Struggling to kill the man who raised him, they brought a delicious idea to the table. Sucks that they did not cook at all with the rest of them. No, scratch that, they forgot to turn the fucking stove on.
Scrape and lick.
Starting here, I have some bias due to his later appearances, but God, I do not like his design. Despite being Dracula's son during a period long before Castlevania 1, he looks about as old as Dracula during Simon's era in most artwork, or significantly older in others. Not to mention his playstyle, easily the weakest character in Castlevania 3. Alucard's main appeal comes from his ability to transform into a bat. For the cost of a draining heart count, you can fly wherever you want as Alucard, transform before you fall into a pit, and take more shortcuts than Grant can. On paper, this sounds busted as hell in a side-scroller. Only problem, Alucard has nothing else. Alucard uses what the game calls the Ball of Destruction, a hilarious title when it sucks so hard. Similar to Trevor's whip, Alucard has to level his balls up. Depending on the level, he tosses out 1, 2, or 3 balls in different directions, meaning that even after leveling him up, you have a high probability that not every ball may hit the same enemy unless you attack at a super close range. A risky move when his balls have a slow delay, don't work on stairs, and deal less damage than any other attack. Top that off with Alucard having no sub-weapons other than the stopwatch, and he really just has no attacking options whatsoever. I get the feeling that the developers got scared that the bat may break the game, so they overly nerfed Alucard to fuck. If you have Alucard, you basically just have a slightly better shortcut option that wastes time because partner swapping lasts a decade. I assume the NES had a hard time loading the second character with their power-ups back in, resulting in a very long animation. It makes the player not want to change back. For Grant, that doesn't matter too much. After you take a shortcut with his wall climbing, you still have cool weapons to use and might just use them until you reach a point where Trevor has the upper hand. While with Alucard, I want to swap back to Trevor ASAP, making him really suck. Since I wanted a breezier time to start, I kept Grant for my first run because you can only keep one partner, while I came back for Alucard during my third run. After talking to Alucard, you reach the third and final fork. With Grant, I took the upper path because, honestly, I forgot which one led where, while I took the lower path with Alucard. Grant brought me to the slightly easier sewer level. Thankfully, Grant can skip the slowest part of the stage here at the start. Not too much to say on this level, just be a little patient. After that one, the third fork converges for Block 7B, the hardest and most annoying level in NES Castlevania. So Castlevania 3 throws a lot of new stage gimmicks at you. Since the gameplay itself reuses Castlevania 1's controls full sail, it needed to innovate with the levels. On this path alone, I mentioned the clock tower and swamp, but we also have occasional spike ceilings preventing you from jumping, and respawning mummies that you need to defeat on the correct side to not get blocked. Challenges not seen in Castlevania 1. Block 7B focuses on little droplets that destroy blocks and falling blocks that create new paths. Oh, sorry, did I say new paths? I meant the only path you can take. Depending on how much Grant and Alucard shortcuts you abuse, you have to stand around patiently for up to 7 screens, including a vertical auto-scroller, which, by the way, this level has 13 screens. Most C3 levels only have about 7, so not only do we have a level with double the number of screens, you have to sit and wait at many of them, with the worst offender right here, a screen where you sit at the bottom while you slowly wait for these blocks to let you reach the ledge. If you lack Alucard, all you can do is jump back and forth to dodge blocks until you can finish the room. As Grant, the time when I did it correctly took 2 minutes. But also, the knockback is so intense that getting hit even once makes it very likely that you fall into a bottomless pit, making it scary to fly as Alucard as well, because if you turn into a bat and fly the whole way up, you may get hit by a block, die, and end up with 5 hearts, preventing you from skipping this room with a bat. Even if you have a lot of hearts as Alucard, at least let the blocks reach maybe midway before you fly. This room fucking sucks. Legit the worst single room in all of NES Castlevania. Besides the auto-scroller, the rest of the stage lightens up after that, but just the fear of doing that room again makes you not want to get a game over. And you know what's even crazier? That lower path I took with Alucard, it also goes on for a long time. Now, thankfully, it focuses on combat, so you at least feel engaged the whole time, especially with the returning bone dragons. You fight them at the walls mid-stage like you did in the prior 2 games, and then an even bigger one as the main boss. After you deal enough damage, he escapes in fear while you need to run after him as water rises from the ground. Pair that with the background having Greek architecture, and it makes me think of this whole area as long destroyed historical sites. Also, I think Boner Boy is the only boss in the game I can find a good use for Alucard for, since his bat gives you enough control to properly dodge him. Now, while I kinda dig this stage, 2 long-ass gauntlets back-to-back gets draining, especially when you take Alucard. Newcomers do not take the lower path when you begin. Just go for the upper path, which I guess we should talk about, because after Block 7, you reach Castlevania proper, and I want us to catch up with the other path first. While not labeled, going up for sure poses less of a challenge. And after I described the bottom path, y'all can probably just take my word that shit doesn't get much harder than that one. On the upper path, you continue a little forward past these jellyfish monsters that I quite like because of how they pop out into smaller jellies. Get to the end, fight a Cyclops, and then you de-petrified our final party member, Sypha Belnadis. So not gonna beat around the bush because it's 2025, Sypha is a lady. During the intro blurb I used he and him because that's what the fan translation had, but again, that was a very old post, which already had other major typos in it. Given the way Japanese works, I cannot write off the possibility that it had gender-neutral pronouns that the translator from whenever ago did not quite recognize. I mentioned this because the North American version really tries to make it look like Sypha is a man. The cover makes Sypha look more feeble, like an old man wizard. Nintendo powered drawer with this very large veiny hand, and when you recruit her, it says recruit him and leave him. Now, I figured since I recorded the game, I could at least send my Japanese footage to my friend Flaffy, who helped me with the Crystal Chronicles video, to check it. He's a native Japanese speaker and confirmed that at the very least, all of the in-game recruitment text only uses gender-neutral terms. Now, I didn't want to ask him to carefully look over the whole manual because the scans have some crusty kanji and he's not my bitch yet, but I figure the in-game text is enough for me to blindly white YouTuber discuss. It seems like the Japanese version either wanted to make Sypha as neutral as possible to have a twist along the lines of, "Heh, we never said their gender, what are you, sexist?" at the end, or they just wanted to make her feminine. Given the type of game and year of release, I don't think we have much point in debating some kind of third middle gender spectrum option. I just don't think the developers would have thought about that at the time. Well, in the English version, legit, I think most of the people working on the game just didn't know she's a girl. It might have just been known by whoever translated the ending. anything. But who really knows? It's all conjecture. Moving on, Sypha has a very unique skill set. She lacks any of the mobility options offered by Grant or Alucard and uses this crappy little rod as her main attack. But she easily gets the best sub-weapons in the 8-bit games. Mao's little red book unleashes a straight high damage flame which can do almost a quarter damage to some bosses. Blue Chew emits ice directly from Sypha's body to freeze water and nearby enemies, letting you kill them in one hit. And her disco balls of demise fuck shit up. Those last ones attempt to home in on enemies and bosses where they can hit multiple times before disappearing for more damage than anything else in the game. Occasionally they completely miss their target, but since Sypha launches out 3 and they have ginormous sprites, you have a low chance of that happening, and the damage from your second use makes up for a first miss. When you have these, you want to keep them at all costs. The fire works good for when you need to go on the offensive, the ice works good as a defensive measure and against water, while the thunder works everywhere, especially vertical segments. Y'all may have noticed that I have mentioned vertical segments a lot today, and that's because we have way more than most other classic Vanias offer, especially rooms with stairs. So many fucking stairs, especially when you get into the castle. You spend most of the second level after getting Sypha in rooms with stairs, so if you get the electro balls at the ghost ship, you better try to keep them, especially because stair walking eats your input sometimes. Due to needing to press up and B for sub-weapons, every NES game had an issue of locking you into a walk animation rather than throwing your weapon. With Sypha's fire and ice books, it makes using them way too risky, but since the electro balls have so many benefits, you make up for a misinput if you just get them out at all, in the Japanese version at least. Altogether, I think this makes it so Sypha is the best choice for more confident players. If you can maintain enough hearts to use her books properly, then you can make lots of the combat easier. While for beginners, I think they should play the game with Grant for all the reasons I said before. Then Alucard must be a ploy to fool kids, because who the fuck wouldn't try to bring along the son of Dracula first? One more fairly straightforward level with Sypha later, and now all the paths have come together at the entryway to Dracula's castle. We have 3 levels left, and this first one combines parts of level 1 and Death's Stage from Castlevania 1, giving me an inverse vibe of Castlevania 2. Simon's quest made you think about the ruined remains of your past journey. Simon has spent a whole game dealing with a curse that could bring his doom, while this castle has already suffered. He sees the death of his heroics before potentially the death of his life. While Castlevania 3 Dracula's Celebration celebrates raiding the castle. You finally hear the vampire killer song, you likely walk in with a good sub-weapon and a partner by your side, especially after the grueling hardship of the lower route, you feel like you reached your victory lap. A victory lap that only Death himself can stop. So bosses in general have received a big upgrade compared to the first one. Back then you could cheese quite a few bosses with spammable sub-weapons, and don't get me wrong, you can still do that a lot this time, but through slightly altered arenas and hitboxes, they made it so more fights require a good understanding of your placement, physics, and the entire team's possible attacks. As early as the ogre protecting Sypha, you come across a boss you can't spam. He has no stun frames, so you need to swap between poking him and jumping to this safe platform. You only have a slow, easy option if you brought Grant with you. We also get more bosses with shakeups midway in. We encounter this spirit in a few stages. Instead of fighting them directly, he possesses 2 other bosses we had already seen, like the mummies from Simon's first adventure, and the ogre I just talked about. But then, on the last time you fight him, or only in the bottom route, the spirit brings out a big buff furry awakening demon. This dude jumps high in the air and punishes you hard if you keep trying the poke and camp strategy that worked against the ogre. Every boss from Castlevania 1 returns with some alteration as well, including death. Due to the changed level layout, you can't spam holy water on Death as easily, but a buffed up Cross can easily lay him out while dealing with his sights. However, Death has a second giant fucking head form impervious to the Cross, making it so if you want to use Trevor's sub-weapons to cheese him, you have to choose which phase to cheese. Or, as a smart player, you can stack your second party member with a good weapon like giving Grant the axe for phase 2, Sypha her thunderballs for phase 1, or get good if you picked Alucard, he's fucked. During my Sypha run, I got my ass handed to me pretty hard at first, but once I actually made it to him with the electric balls and holy water, I wrecked him, forcing me to know the whole stage inside and out so I don't lose anything. After that, we get one more stage that in Japanese can drag on slightly, but I'll come back when we talk about the English version because some of you already know. Now we reach the final level, a short little stage with only a few rooms that I feel have a complement for each character. Grant eases through this auto-scroller with his mobility, Alucard can fly over this breaking floor segment, and any of Sypha's magic spells make short work of this room with spiders and skeletons, wiping out the last of Dracula's monsters before we get into an oddly empty clock room, patiently jumping from pendulum to reach Dracula's chamber. Here, we see the same room as Simon, a stairway lit by the moon and candles preceding Dracula. Candles you can pretty easily grind for a cross, hearts, double shot, Sypha's electric balls, and an axe for Grant, meaning you can stack the fuck up for Drac. As Dracula has amassed so much power and lost none of it, he has 3 whole phases for his first confrontation with the Belmonts. First, a fight against an evil, warlockish Dracula who warps around and attacks with flames like we saw against Simon, only now the fires come from the floor, and if you have poor placement, he can trap you with no way out. Grant's high jump helps you out here the best to dodge his flames. After you slice his head off, Dracula splits off into multiple heads that you need to melt off. Use Sypha's electric orbs to hit the most at once. With those 2 phases defeated, you face off against Dracula's final form, a giant, laser-spewing bird demon that you can only damage at the head, meaning you need to bring an axe, hope for Sypha's electric balls to hit, or coast on these moving platforms to hit him. I think I consider the first phase hardest, but just the fear of doing both phases again, as well as grinding the candles for hearts, clenches my cheeks enough where I occasionally made dumb slip-ups. However, if you can get over your fears, beating Dracula feels satisfying as fuck. Seeing that castle fall, we've finally finished the original Castlevania trilogy. All of our heroes can move on with the defeat of Dracula. Trevor has redeemed his family's reputation, leading to the citizens to trust Belmonts for generations to come. Sypha, gaining hope after meeting Trevor, joins with him to extend the Belmont lineage, strengthening the Belmonts' magical prowess. Grant makes it his life's mission to help rebuild towns pillaged by Dracula's army, while Alucard, feeling conflicted about killing his own father, returns to his underground coffin, where he slumbers until the time he must return, never seeing his friends again. When it comes to 2D action games on NES, few accomplish as much as Dracula's Curse. Imposing bosses, diverging paths that heavily alter difficulty, and 4 playable characters with relatively fleshed out backstories. You just didn't see this outside of RPGs at the time, which even then only a few went above and beyond for character writing. I have issues with it. Alucard feels gimped compared to everyone else, and his route can feel like a goddamn gauntlet. But I can't call this anything less than a masterclass of NES programming, and a perfect way to cap off the series on the console it began on. Though if this is how I feel, why did I feel so drained as a kid? As the market for localizing Japanese media for foreign audiences grew, companies had to figure out how much to change to fit their tastes. Because clearly, we wanted all foreign things to pretend like they came from America. And if you did come from America, you better put on these European outfits, eat some German-influenced foods, and praise Jesus. That's the American way. One question Japanese game devs couldn't figure out was if Americans wanted games harder or easier than Japan. Some developers thought Americans couldn't handle hardships, hence why Mario 2 Lost Levels and Final Fantasy V both skipped North America, Mega Man 2 added an easy mode, and Karnov gives you unlimited continues. While other developers thought Americans could handle anything and made their games harder. Lol, JK, they didn't think that. Japanese devs didn't like Americans renting games instead of buying them since it meant the company didn't get much back, so they upped difficulties to crazy degrees so players had to buy a game for enough time to finish them. Konami was infamous for how much harder they made international versions of their games. A few entries of Contra, Ninja Turtles, Castlevania all made it harder outside of Japan in various ways. Hell, all the way up to the PS2 releases for Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3, they made shit harder harder with the infamous European Extreme mode. And of all the releases where they increased the difficulty, Castlevania 3 is either the worst or second worst. Castlevania 3 had some of the censorship stuff common on the NES, like making ancient lady statues less nude and changing the cross to look slightly less holy, but this difficulty, it starts out fine enough, only changing once you get Grant. Grant no longer has his projectile knife, only a dinky little stab with less range than Sypha's rod. This doesn't ruin Grant. His movement abilities afford you so much that you could afford just using his axe for a good weapon. Only thing is, now half of where an axe normally dropped got changed to a dagger, preventing you from having the versatility offered in the Japanese version. On its own, not the worst nerf. Mainly just means you can't have an axe and a knife at the same time, and a few of the bosses where Grant could crouch and throw the knife, he loses that option. But two other things make it way worse. Many candles change what they house for every character. What originally had a cross might have a knife, Sypha gets a fire instead of an electric ball, etc. Almost always, they make the weapon weaker. If you ever get a boomerang, you better not fucking lose it because that's rarer than your mom's approval. And to make it all so much worse, the damage numbers. In the Famicom version, you take damage depending on the enemy type, with a slight increase for most enemies near the end. So Medusa heads deal 2 damage at the start and 3 damage during the final 3 stages. Fair enough. Means you can still take 5 to 6 hits during the end, no matter what happens. While in the NES version, they changed it so across the board, every normal enemy or hazard has a fixed damage number depending on the stage. First 3 stages you always take 2 damage, so debatably easier. Stages 4 through 7 you take 3, so only slightly harder, while the final 3 stages make it where you take 4 damage for every single hit. Tiny Fireball, Skeleton, Contact, all of it deals 4 damage, meaning you have 4 hits to get through a stage. Really aggravating in Stage 9, which features a room with tall-ass stairs where flying skeleton knights attack you with a wave pattern as bone pillars shoot fire at you, followed 2 rooms later by a slower auto-scroller that punishes you for going too fast, and 2 more rooms later puts you in a position where you gotta split focus between birds, water pushing you around, and mer people. Even one hit here is absolutely devastating because the following boss, a doppelganger that copies whoever you use, can get in positions where you have no good answer to escape. And check this, you respawn here when you die. So if you want to get a sub-weapon or hearts, you need to go right into the heart of battle with all this shit again. No Grant bullshitting out of this one. I got so fucking pissed with this level in the NES version. So it's crazy to say that we still have the bullshit of Dracula. Unlike the other Castlevania games that normally start you right before Dracula when you die or game over, Castlevania 3 fucks you. If you die to Dracula, you go all the way back to this room. And if you game over to Dracula, you start the whole level again. Meaning that if you want a chance to actually beat him, you basically need to play everything from this point with the wall meat without getting hit. Especially because they removed the boomerang and electric balls from this level. Either use the axe, knife, or holy water to fight him. Like, holy shit, Konami must have hated Blockbuster. Is that the real Dracula's curse? Did Konami summon the king of vampires to curse Blockbuster into bankruptcy after 20 years' time? Because I have no other explanation for why they thought this shit was okay. You have to make it easier by naming yourself Help Me. This gives you 10 lives after every game over instead of the usual 3. But in my opinion, that's just placing a band-aid onto a hemorrhoid. As soon as you encounter shit, it stops working. Yeah, there's a reason why despite growing up with the NES version, I consistently go back to Akumajo Densetsu these days. I have the gloating points of saying I got all the routes back when I was 13 or 14. I don't need to do it again. If you want to play Akumajo Densetsu, you can easily do that on the Modern Anniversary Collection, and I recommend you do. Of course, I can't choose how you go about it, but I'd say take the top path first. Maybe with Grant to make your first run the easiest. Sypha also works out though. In Actually, if you want to alter your run even more, by punching in one of the correct names of the developers, you can start the journey with a companion, offering you some extra goodies and shortcuts outside of Trevor's reach. I think Alucard actually gets the most use in these earlier levels you shouldn't have him in. While I don't consider it my number 1 in the series, I can understand why so many of those forum goers called it the peak of the 8-bit games all those years ago, and I hope they find solace with all the representation the characters received in spin-offs, crossovers, reboots, and the 4-season animated series.